You again. I suppose you'd like me to tell you another bedtime story. What's the magic phrase?
You eat shit.
Oh, fine. When the first batch of Oingo Boingo LPs and CDs came out, people were continuously asking me if I was going to reissue Danny Elfman's 1984 solo album. Solo. It wasn't part of the original plan, but since there seemed to be so much interest, I submitted a request for CD and LP in June 2021. A lot of people were calling this Boingo's fourth album. It's true that the band members played on it, but personally I found the album somewhat underwhelming. I had the original CD since the 90s, but only liked 4 songs on it, 2 of which date back to the 1983 Boingo album, Good for Your Soul. The songs Cool City and Lightning had been recorded during those 1983 sessions, but went unused. Elfman would pull them back out and re-record them for his solo album, Solo. At the time, Oingo Boingo had left A&M Records and moved over to MCA Records. I recall reading that Elfman was getting annoyed being tagged as the band who do all of those really fast songs. Solo was going to change that. The only single from the album, Gratitude, was a catchy dance song. Some of the other changes didn't work so well. The dance funk sound on a few songs are not what I would call career highlights, and the middle-of-the-road AOR sound of the song The Last Time was far too generic. Some fans may see it as the fourth Boingo album. I see it as an experimental side project to scratch some itches. As the Oingo Boingo titles continued to sell well, I put in further reissue requests. In January 2022, I requested the 1985 album Dead Man's Party for a vinyl reissue, along with CD and LP requests for the 1987 album Boingo, or however the hell you pronounce it. People had asked me why I hadn't requested to do Dead Man's Party on vinyl when I asked for the CD. My answer was that UMG had been doing their own colored vinyl edition of Dead Man's Party on and off for many years, and I didn't think the market would be receptive to another edition. But people kept asking to hear my remastering on a vinyl reissue, so I figured what the hell. At the time, the UMG edition appeared to be unavailable. I admit that I had that pressing, and it was not all that great. I suspected I could do better, and give it a multicolored mix too. I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but I hadn't even heard the full Dead Man's Party album until around 2019. I tried a couple of the later albums in the 90s and didn't much care for them at the time. I knew of the 4 singles from Dead Man's Party, all of which I thought were okay, but none of which I went crazy over. When I finally got the CD, I was pleasantly surprised to hear a lot of really catchy hooks and songs I hadn't previously heard, such as No One Lives Forever, Same Man I Was Before, and Help Me! In March 2022, I sent in a daring request to do the Boingo Alive album on triple vinyl, including all of the songs from the CD edition, many of which were dropped from the original double vinyl edition released in 1988. I didn't request a CD edition because I wasn't sure of the demand. The original CD set was still easy to find, and there wasn't much in the way of bonus material I could include. I would learn to regret this. In April 2022, I requested the 1990 album Dark at the End of the Tunnel on CD and LP. I remember seeing the CD all over the cheapy used bins back in the day, and that's how I first heard the album. I think I gave it one brief listen back then, felt it was too removed from what I liked about the band, and sold it right back to the store. With all of the enthusiasm around the band's catalog, I felt if this only had a single pressing, it would still have been enough of a success to have been worth it. I had asked my licensing contacts several times about the Elfman solo album in the nearly a year since it had been submitted, but never got a response. In August 2022, Danny Elfman announced Halloween live shows spanning his full career from Oingo Boingo through some of his TV and soundtrack work. Now, I don't want to be too presumptuous here, but Danny Elfman had been pretty dismissive of his time in Oingo Boingo for a long time. Then my reissues start coming out in mid-2021 to lots of excitement and rave reviews. Even his brother's wife was in my list of customers for the first vinyl pressing of Only a Lad. So I don't want to say me bringing the band's catalog back from the dead and all the enthusiasm around it might have had anything to do with Danny revisiting those old songs, realizing maybe they're not as unimportant as he might have thought. But maybe it did. Either way, I used it as a motivating tool. I sent my primary contact a message telling him, Danny has just announced these career-spanning shows for Halloween, and perhaps I could get some of these Boingo and related clearances? He replied and said he'll try to get them prioritized. Within the next couple of weeks, I got final clearances for everything Boingo I had in at the time. This was exciting and a little intimidating because it was a massive amount due for the advances, and that triple LP was not cheap. Then would come the required deposits for all of these vinyl reissues with the new manufacturer. I took a deep gulp and just started getting to work. I went through and requested all the tapes needed. For the Elfman solo album, I was relieved to find masters for the first and second editions. Unlike the earlier Boingo Nothing to Fear reissue where I restored the original long version of Private Life to the album's running order, I decided I would leave the original mix of Gratitude from the first pressing to the bonus tracks. You might ask, why, Scott? Why did you do this? It was another personal preference. The remix that ended up replacing the first mix is better in my opinion, and I liked it being the album opener. I also felt the original mix did have an unfinished sound, almost like a rough mix, so felt it would be better as a bonus track. As far as bonus tracks for the solo album, the only things I could include were the multitude of mixes of Gratitude, but the fire came into play again. The 12-inch and single masters for Gratitude had burned in the fire. Thankfully, the UK had a master with most of the mixes and provided a download link. The one they didn't have was the Tornado version from the USA 12-inch. Since this mix wasn't released in the UK, there were no alternative tape sources and I had to master it from vinyl. Dead Man's Party was easy. I compiled the LP sides and tweaked the audio a bit for the vinyl cut. The 1987 Boingo album was the most robust package. One of the album outtakes had been released on a promo 7-inch box set of the album, so I was able to include it. I tried to include the theme song to the short-lived TV show from 1986 titled Fast Times, but was told that even though they have the master tape, UMG don't have the rights to the song. I filled out the rest of the space with remixes of the singles Pain and Not My Slave, along with one of the Weird Science remixes I had no room for on the earlier Dead Man's Party CD. Again, the fire had some impact. There was a 12-inch master for the song Pain that I requested, but when I got the transfer, it was not the correct mix. The original 12-inch single master, which was listed on my outdated pre-fire PDF, was now dead and gone. I mastered the 12-inch mix and a cappella versions from vinyl. Everything else came from master tapes. In fact, most of the album masters for this batch of releases were the absolute original masters, not production copies. This album is well known for a lot of really great outtakes, some of which are better than songs that made the final album cut. My guess is that Elfman overthinks things, and it might cloud his judgment on the final running order. Songs like Mama, Inside, Remember My Name, and Cinderella Undercover are all great songs that had been completed during these sessions, along with another I've never heard of called Tears Will Flow, and a track called Find You that was only available on a multitrack. And then you have songs like Not My Slave and New Generation that were outtakes from Dead Man's Party that ended up here 2 years later. When I first heard the album in the 90s, I didn't care for it at all. My current opinion is improved, but songs like Where Do All My Friends Go, We Close Our Eyes, and My Life wouldn't have been missed by me had they been replaced with any of those superior album outtakes. The song Elevator Man had apparently been earmarked for a 12-inch single release because there's a full 12-inch single master that survived the fire, collecting dust in the vault. I'm not a big fan of live albums, And Boingo Alive is fine, but not the highlight for me Elfman views it as. He has stated that the only Boingo albums he can tolerate are the 2 live albums they released, claiming they never sounded great in the studio. I have to disagree, and that's with most artists. There are very rare occasions where a live version squashes the studio recording. You ever hear the 1981 Drury Lane version of OMD's song Bunker Soldiers? It destroys the studio version. None of the versions on Boingo Alive surpass the studio versions, in my opinion. Some of them are close, but a couple of them don't work at all. Private Life was ruined. What's with the acoustic guitar? And why is he singing it like that? Staring at the light bulb, hanging from the ceiling. No! Stop that right now! The one new song, Winning Side, is really good. There's also a remix of the song from a promo CD sampler that I wanted to include on my belated CD reissue request, but by that time UMG had shut the catalog off from third-party licensing. More on that later. Dark at the End of the Tunnel is the band lost in the landscape of what was happening at the time. It's all over the place, but with some really great songs once you take the time to listen to them. When the Lights Go Out is the best, kinda dark, a little gothic. Runaway, the Escape song, is the catchiest thing on the album and a personal favorite. They did select the worst song on the album, Out of Control, as the single, and it was so non-Boingo that you almost had to wonder if releasing this was self-sabotage. For the CD bonus tracks, I kept it straightforward with a couple of those Out of Control remixes and different mixes of a couple of other songs. For the LP, I was also including the song Right to Know, which was previously an extra track on the original CD. When I got the CD stock, I was really happy with the final results. The CDs were released on November 18th, 2022.
Now is that gratitude, or is it really love? Some kind of reality? They say lightning, lightning never strikes twice. Welcome to my little world, completely self-contained. I'm gonna find my way home again. When the lights go out, everybody has fun, when the lights go out. By the way, little lions can play with matches.
I did like the last batch the previous year, offered the 3 CDs initially as a Boingo bundle during the pre-order period, and then individually on the release date. Like the first batch, I was slammed with orders and it took weeks to catch up. It was another triumphant entry into my label's catalog and people were loving the results. When I put them into distribution, they charted within the top sellers. My new vinyl manufacturer was the Vinyl Lab in Tennessee. They seemed like a nice bunch, but the prices were definitely on the high end. This was when I started taking some of the necessary parts of the final product into my own hands. I found a place called Solid Merch that I would get my album covers and inserts through, and another place where I would order the variant stickers. I also purchased my own poly-lined inner sleeves and selected my own lacquer cutter and plating facility. All of this was my effort to keep the total cost lower. It was a lot of additional work, but it was so I could keep my vinyl price increases lower. If I order all of this through the vinyl manufacturer with their markups, it makes a significant difference. The one LP jacket I got through the manufacturer was the trifold I planned for the Boingo Alive LP set. I was able to negotiate a decent price on that one. When the test pressing started rolling in, the results were mixed. Since GZ had a habit of dropping the high end, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, I mastered with the assumption I may get something similar with the new lacquer cuts that were being done on these releases. Turns out, the highs were very much intact. I felt most of them sounded good, but the Boingo Alive set had me distressed. With the way that the album was mixed, some of the songs sounded excessively tinny with the remastering for vinyl I had become accustomed to from my first manufacturer. The cost of an LP cut was around $500 each at the time, and that doesn't include the cost of additional plating. My OCD made me want to recut the whole LP set, but I settled on redoing only LP 1 since it was the most offending. There were a couple of songs over records 2 and 3 that I felt were a bit much, but not enough to redo the whole thing. I lucked out that the other LP cuts were all decent. When the first of the LP jackets were received by the manufacturer, some of the boxes had been crushed in transit. This began a lengthy struggle with Solid Merch to get the replacements ordered. The jackets are printed in Canada at a large print facility, and it turns out to be the same one Precision used. It was turning into a similar situation that I'd encountered before. I was told dates to expect the replacement jackets to ship, and the dates would come and go. I was struggling for communication and leaving unanswered voicemails. It didn't help that this was November, so the holidays weren't going to help expedite things. It took over a month for the replacement jackets to be completed and received by the manufacturer. I received the stock for the Danny Elfman solo LP and the Dark at the End of the Tunnel LP in early February 2023. The release date for these two was February 17th, 2023. The others were coming later. The color variants for the Elfman LP were red and yellow bases, each with a black swirl. For the Boingo LP, I went with a silver and black mix and a gold and red mix. I knew that silver and gold were going to be a little noisier than typical colors, but I was fine with it. I wasn't entirely happy with the jacket prints, and it was my fault. I had started reducing my album cover file sizes from a huge 600 dpi to the standard 300 dpi when preparing the final press quality files. What I neglected to do was add a light Gaussian blur to the images, which helped smooth out patterns under 600 dpi. Since the patterns were not visible on my computer screen, I wasn't aware until I had the finished copies in hand. It wasn't terrible, but these two would be the worst offenders. For the next pressings, I would add the blur, and those prints looked excellent. The Elfman LP cover was also not the same shade of yellow as the original. I would also tweak this for the next pressing. The pressing quality was nice. Both were well centered and played nicely, taking into account the limitations of the silver and gold vinyl. As expected, the pre-orders were massive and kept me very busy for a couple of weeks. These were not going to be instant sellouts or even entirely direct sale sellouts, which I anticipated since I knew not all of the fans of the early albums were interested in the later ones. I still had no complaints, and when these went into distribution, I think there were less than 200 copies of each left. The next batch also had a snag with the LP covers. When they were received by the manufacturer, they found Dead Man's Party, the one people seemed most interested in, had been shorted around 90 covers. Since it was just below their underrun threshold, I was told there would not be a reprint. I was not happy about this. They did refund me the difference, but with the time and frustration on this first experience with Solid Merch, I felt maybe it would be best just to get the album covers through the manufacturer despite the markup. But rather than leave this as is for now, I wanted to provide a happy outcome. As I would continue through pressings and manufacturers, I would occasionally get the album covers through them. Turned out all of them were using the same printer in Canada and adding a considerable markup over what Solid Merch would charge. I eventually decided to give Solid Merch another try, and everything went very smoothly over several more orders. Communication was great and the relationship was mended, and I would use them through to my last LP pressing. This example shows that a challenged first impression may not be the one to base a final decision on. It all worked out well once I started working with them again. The manufacturing for the last 3 LPs was completed towards the end of March. When the stock arrived, it totaled 3,011 pounds. I had to lug all of that into the house. That was exhausting. What do you think, Wendy?
I'm sick of this hard labor shit!
Oh, quit complaining. I bought you lunch. The prints on these looked better, but there was a spelling error on Dead Man's Party. Since UMG had been putting out their own pressing for some years, this was the one and only time I got an LP jacket art file from them. I didn't think to proofread it, and one of the song titles was misspelled. Did you see it? I didn't until a buyer pointed it out to me. As with most mistakes noticed on a first pressing, I would fix this on the next. The color choices came out pretty nice. Dead Man's Party was a pink with blue swirl and a green with yellow swirl. The green variant swallowed most of the yellow, so it's not as obvious. Boingo was a clear blue with a blue swirl and an orange base with a black swirl. With the live LP being a very costly venture, I chose to have each LP on a single color: blue, red, purple. The trifold sleeve came out just as I had hoped. Not bad for a first time. The pressing quality on all was very nice, no complaints. There had been some communication challenges with the manufacturer at times and some unexpected delays, but at this point it's all starting to sound the same, so I'll just leave it that basic. You can fill in the blanks. The release date for this batch was April 7th, 2023.
Don't worry too much. You make yourself sad. You can't change fate. I'm not the same man I was before. It's the wind inside, and everyone is cheering. They were the only friends I ever trusted, and now they're scattered, living in the city.
Pre-orders were haywire, and I was putting together huge packages, stuffing them in boxes during the day and labeling them in the evening. I guess my fears on Dead Man's Party was wasted energy because the pink and blue edition sold out in less than 24 hours. The other variant would hang around a little while longer, but not enough to make it into distribution. There were some people complaining about the live set costing around $70, but they didn't understand the cost that went into it, and that it was a triple LP set licensed from a major label. Publishing costs on over 30 songs was over $4,000 alone. When all was said and done, there were only about 300 of the 1,000 unit pressing of this beast that made it to distribution, and they sold out in no time. There were less than that of the Boingo LP to also make it to distribution on this first pressing. People were really loving these vinyl reissues, but there was an unexpected issue reported. A couple of people informed me that their triple Boingo Alive LP was missing LP number 2, the one in the center of the package. I notified the manufacturer, and they had a box of LP2 still sitting there in polylined sleeves. They sent them to me for these and any other reports. The immediate and longer-term issue was that I now had to weigh every copy before it was packaged or sent into distribution to ensure it's not obviously lighter, meaning it would likely be missing an LP. By the end, it wasn't much at all, but those 2 early reports kept me on my toes. Speaking of extra LPs, when they sent me the initial pallets of stock, they also included extra boxes of pressed Boingo LPs, both variants. Usually they take any extras like this and grind them up to be mixed in for use with their random color options. I can't bear to throw these out, so I hold on to them for whatever reason. Most of this batch of titles would move into another pressing. Some would be slower movers that wouldn't reach the counts of the earlier catalog. I considered doing a very small repress of the live album, but in the end opted against it. By the time of the represses, I moved on to another vinyl manufacturer, this one called New Orleans Record Press. I didn't have a bad experience with the Vinyl Lab, aside from the previously mentioned issues, but wanted to try someone else, and one that offered a little bit of cost savings. Aside from these first-run Boingo LPs, the Vinyl Lab had done a number of represses for me as well, mostly without issue. Both the CD and LP reissues of the later Boingo catalog all did what I expected. They sold well enough, but definitely not the same numbers of the earlier catalog. Dead Man's Party was the big one, but the slowest sellers were Elfman's solo album and the 1990 Boingo album. It was a great run, and I was trying to scrape a few more titles out of the Boingo catalog for future reissues. I guess my desire for the Oingo Boingo outtakes had become sort of an obsession. I've had multiple dreams, the most recent only about a month ago, of talking to Danny Elfman, trying to convince him to let me put out all of those album outtakes and unreleased mixes. I try to plead the case that most are already out there but in lesser quality, and how this would be a great way to say thank you to the fans for keeping the torch burning, as well as just a chance to preserve these tapes to digital before becoming completely unusable, assuming some of them aren't already that way. Even in the dreams, he either doesn't respond or is indifferent. It's obvious that hours and hours went into writing, arranging, and recording these songs and versions, so to allow them to end up on the scrap heap when it's all proven to be quality material is criminal. I understand Danny doesn't like to look backwards, so let someone else head the project. No need to let it all go to waste. Hint, hint. In January 2023, the primary licensing contact informed me they were looking at moving back to finished goods deals from license out deals, at least for CDs. I don't know why they were doing this, but I'm guessing it was because they would be in control of how many units were manufactured. When it came to the license out deals, clients handled the manufacturing and were trusted to be forthcoming if they moved into additional pressings outside of what was covered by the advances. I was always sending them payments for the later pressings, but perhaps some of their clients were not. I got one new quote, this one for an expanded edition of the 1986 Pete Shelley album Heaven in the Sea. I was horrified when I saw the deal memo was for $9.45 per unit. What? I would literally lose at least $1 per sale through distribution. This made no sense. I asked why the cost was so high. I was told because everything had increased in price in the few years since the last finished goods deals. That was true to a degree, a much lesser degree with CDs than vinyl. Manufacturing costs had gone up and publishing had begun creeping up on a yearly basis, but it still didn't justify this much. I put together a breakdown of my cost for the same package, and the cost was around $3 per unit less. That's $3,000. I also shared with him my distribution take and how I would be losing money with each sale. He agreed the pricing with my breakdown doesn't make sense and asked what I would be okay with, price-wise. I told him I could possibly increase my CD titles to $18 or $19, but it would likely result in the loss of customers. He said he would see what he could do. In June 2021, I submitted a CD request to do the 1984 album by Christina titled Sleep It Off, with a load of bonus tracks. The two original Christina albums had been released on CD years earlier, and they were god-awful vinyl transfers on most of the songs. They were literally the worst vinyl transfers I had heard on an official CD release. Since I had the UMG master tape list, I knew the masters for everything still existed, so I tried to cram my CD full of extras. Sadly, the hilarious and wonderful Christina Monet passed away in March 2020 from COVID, so my efforts to celebrate her work were being done posthumously. I was introduced to Christina by my dearly departed friend Jay Adams. He had discovered her during one of the extremely few MTV airings of her video Ticket to the Tropics. Being a veteran video collector, Jay had never been able to find a copy of that video over the years. It was beyond rare. During one of my interactions with another trader, I found he had a copy from MTV and I got it. Jay almost passed out. It was something he had wanted to see again for around 15 years at that time. I was happy to share it with him and also posted it to YouTube some years ago.
We can walk, it's not that far. The night will give us wings.
I got a message from Final Clearance in December 2022 that they can only clear 2 of the bonus tracks for the USA. That was disappointing since all of those masters are available. Since Christina was signed to two main labels, Island and Mercury, both of which are now owned by UMG, I'm wondering if maybe they only looked at one contract and perhaps that caused the issue? I don't know. But I told her I was willing to proceed with only the two extras. The main album needed a proper remaster from tapes. I was very relieved that one of the allowed bonus tracks was my favorite Christina song, the campy Christmas misery song, Things Fall Apart.
There wasn't any snow, but there was rain. He licked me like a candy cane.
Final clearance came on January 5th, 2023, and I immediately got to work. I received the main album master from the USA and the two bonus tracks from the UK. The album never came out in the UK, but looking over the master tape list, it seems it was prepared in 1982 for a release on Island Records, but had been shelved for whatever reason. The running order was different, and it had an additional track. With Sleep It Off finally coming out in the USA in 1984 after a label change, the album was already 2 years old. I sent my artwork in for review on January 10th. Since my artwork approvals had been coming through quickly, I expected similar. 2 weeks later, I sent an inquiry on the artwork stating my planned release was 4 weeks away, so I was hoping to move forward soon. Everybody now! No response! She was sending me messages about other things, but nothing pertaining to the simple artwork review. It was literally a fold-over insert, not even a booklet. I sent another inquiry on February 1st, 2023 to both of my licensing contacts. No response. Around this time, I started getting sick. My entire abdomen was aching and got hard as a rock, and it had nothing to do with sit-ups, trust me. I also had a lump in my throat. This went on for days and days, so I set up a doctor appointment. On February 8th, I sent a message to my primary contact asking if there were issues with the minimal artwork because I've been unable to get any sort of response in a full month. He suggested I send her another reminder. I could just see her sitting there in front of her computer screen, having a sadistic laugh with each inquiry that she ignored. I sent another message to her telling her that Dad suggested I send her another reminder. In less than 2 hours, I got the approval.
It's a damn good thing you don't know how much he hates your guts.
I finished up the minor updates she requested and got it off to the manufacturer. Around this time, I had my doctor appointment. He ordered a number of tests, all of which came out fine. During the follow-up, he said all of the symptoms I reported are often associated with heavy stress, telling me how the mind controls the body. He asked if I was under stress. I erupted about the business I run and the main person who has caused me the most grief over the years. I told him the main point of stress, meaning the delayed artwork approval impacting my release plans, had recently finished up, but I still felt rough. He explained the symptoms do not resolve immediately. It could take some time once the stressor is under control. He suggested I look into anti-anxiety medications. I wasn't going to do that because of this troublesome person I was required to struggle to work with. The symptoms finally began resolving a couple of weeks later, but would crop up again a few more times in the future as, to quote Christina, things fall apart. Sleep It Off was released on March 10th, 2023.
You did these sexy things with your doubted eyes. You had teeth, real teeth. Don't want to share a taxi, don't want another drink. You'll do just fine without me, don't mutilate.
The interest in the album was light. A lot of people were taking a chance. Others who sampled it on my website were not turned on by it. I accept that it's even more culty than some of my other releases. Christina often had a deadpan delivery and a campy wit. Even in distribution, sales were light. Long-term fans who bought it were thrilled by the improved sound quality. Some of those taking a chance thought there was an error on the disc. Tracks 4 and 5 on the album segue very oddly, with track 4 stopping abruptly and track 5 starting like a record running slow and picking up speed. I had to assure a lot of buyers who sent messages that this is exactly the way it was on the original vinyl and the master tape. It was apparently a creative decision, as odd as it may be. With sales so light, I felt this was going to take a lifetime to move the single pressing. With the gradual sales over the last couple of years, I've eventually moved around 800 copies, so not too bad after all. On April 3rd, 2023, I received final clearance for the Oingo Boingo LP Skeletons in the Closet. This was a compilation LP of 12 tracks from their first 3 albums on the A&M label. It was released without band consent in 1989. With Boingo having become my flagship catalog, I figured I'd mine that well while I could. As per usual, as soon as I received the clearance, I wired payment and sent the notification. I got a reply that they've had a process change and they now want licensees to wait to submit payment until an invoice is received, which they claimed would be 1 to 2 weeks. It also turned out they changed the account that payments are supposed to be sent, and I'm only finding out about this now after over $4,000 was submitted to an account they said they no longer use. Maybe it's just me, but I would think a change in process and accounts to wire payment might be something you'd consider telling your clients in advance of a situation like this happening. Since I already had all the master sources, this was just a matter of compiling everything into LP side files. This one was all pretty straightforward without issue. The test pressings checked out, the artwork came out well, and I even recreated the original LP hype sticker to include my color variant choices. The variants for this were to be a brown with black swirl, which came out looking like chocolate or wood grain. The other one was a brown and white mix, which looked like hot chocolate. As I had come to expect, enthusiasm was high for this one. Pre-orders opened in late July with a release date of August 14th, 2023. Initial sales were pretty good, but a moderate amount did make it into distribution before it was gone. Later in the year, during discussion with my distributor, I mentioned that 2023 wasn't bringing much in the way of CD clearances, and that UMG were being completely unresponsive to my various inquiries. It was suggested that I should send them each a Starbucks gift card or even investigate to find out their favorite restaurants, fly out to California, and take them out to dinner. That kind of sucking up goes against every fiber of my being. I was sick that such a thing was even suggested. I guess that's the way the corporate game is played, but I've never been a corporate sellout. I still held on to the unrealistic mindset that I should be judged on the work, not the game playing. I was always quick to pay and struggled to keep my frustration in check when it came to email. I could never pull off a straight face in front of either of these people. The kind of anonymity with this sort of business relationship is what allowed it to continue this long. I don't doubt had I spoken to the primary contact on the phone now and then that it would have helped both sides. The one time I tried to call him, he quickly sent me to voicemail and then sent an email response. He obviously wanted to keep it electronic communication only. I had no interest in making him my new BFF, but with the few phone calls that I had with my original contact at Warner making it a more lifelike interaction, I thought maybe a once-yearly voice check-in with UMG could be beneficial. Out of desperation to try to keep a release schedule, I had been in touch with Warner about some possible vinyl reissues. The first one was the Danielle Dax compilation LP, Dark Adapted Eye, that I released on CD in 2019. I felt the CD had sold enough that the LP could be worthwhile and hopefully not another costly sales dud. One thing I'll say about Warner is of the few titles I've licensed from them, they've never contacted me to notify me of a clearance. I have always found out about clearances during follow-ups. For all I know, they could have been cleared for months. It was the same with this Danielle LP, this being a title I inquired about in late 2021. I found it had been cleared after an inquiry in March 2023. The pricing was kinda scary, $5 per unit. That meant $5,000 just for the master rights on 1,000 units. I still had to pay everything else. This was about $1,000 more expensive than Universal at this time, and there's really no excuse for it, other than a deterrence measure, but whatever. This would be my first vinyl pressing with my latest vinyl manufacturer, New Orleans Record Press. The people I interacted with were all very friendly and responsive, and the process got moving quickly. My plan for this edition was to include an insert with the lyrics that I didn't include on the CD edition. Rather than the black and white of the original LP inner sleeve, I chose a black insert with gold text to keep in context with the album cover and to make it look more glitzy. For my LP labels, I would have done like I had with UMG LPs and used the front cover on the label. But knowing Warner and their extreme restrictions, I used a symbol from the album on side 1 and a text-based label for side 2. I was surprised this was acceptable. I used the lacquer cutter the manufacturer worked with. It took a while for the test pressings, but when they arrived, I quickly rejected it. The cutter neglected to put a divide between tracks 5 and 6 on side 1, so it looked like one long song. No, that won't do. The cutter double-checked, acknowledged the fault, and recut side 1. For the color choices, I selected a gold and white mix that looked really cool. I also chose a translucent yellow, partially because they made their own translucent colors by mixing opaque with clear, so it gave it a sort of yellow swirl look. The finished stock arrived around mid-August, and the release date was August 28, 2023.
A big hollow man with a fistful of shame came walking across.
I'm gonna miss those sweet lips when the sun reads the morning.
Well, it was not what you would call an explosive hit. I was being reminded yet again that the vinyl revival is a very selective thing. It seems if you are a Fleetwood Mac, Pink Floyd, or any of the other classic rock mainstays, you can continue to sell thousands and thousands of LPs, even if there are already millions of copies out there. I quickly put this into distribution, and it still didn't do much. I just felt that so many people were missing out because this is such a fantastic collection of songs, but I've never been known for being part of the majority's way of thinking. The price soon dropped from the original $26.99, which was already very low by 2023 pricing. Being the most expensive single LP to license and manufacture, I viewed it as a lesson learned. I don't regret doing it because I love having it, but nearly 2 years since it first became available, it's barely moved a third the amount the CD has. The world is apparently too busy with Taylor Swift and Adele. In my world, the female chart toppers are Danielle, Dax, and Christina. I much prefer that world. On April 5th, 2023, I received final clearance for a vinyl reissue of the Oingo Boingo debut EP. The EP was originally released on 10-inch vinyl in 1980 and came with an inner sleeve with lyrics. It was soon reissued on 12-inch vinyl without the inner sleeve and with a new recording of the song Ain't This the Life. For my reissue, I requested both versions of Ain't This the Life and planned to do it as a 12-inch release with an insert recreating the 10-inch inner sleeve, but adding a little color. This would be my first time using the new invoice process before submitting payment. I would find that despite their claim of invoices arriving in 1 to 2 weeks, the reality was 3 to 4 weeks. Great. More delays. Test pressings were great and the manufacturing was problem-free. My color choices were a yellow base with purple swirl and a gray with black swirl. Pre-orders opened in late August with a release date of September 8, 2023.
I want to make violent love to you by the moon above.
Folks below, they say it ain't fair. And with them, I really don't care. Try to be mon ami, eh?
The EP sold pretty well, and the rest quickly sold in distribution. This one did not have the same moving power as the first 3 albums, which kinda surprised me. I guess I'd been spoiled. These would be my last Boingo releases. I eventually tried to get Boingo Alive for a CD reissue and was surprised when it was denied. I also attempted a 2 LP version of Dead Man's Party and a double LP of the Best O Boingo compilation, both of which were denied. When I asked what's going on, I was told not to expect any further Boingo clearances. Apparently, the catalog had been shut off from third-party licensing. This has happened before when UMG decided to put the catalog into review to see if they want to do anything with it. Or who knows, maybe Elfman told them to stop. Either way, I think I did pretty good, while I could. I should also note that I was constantly asked if I had plans to do the Boingo Farewell live album from the mid-90s. I had no interest, but when I read that the cassette had 2 tracks not on the CD, I did start toying with the idea of doing another triple vinyl live album release, including all of the songs. I didn't attempt a request after the other titles got shot down. Back to Warner. In March 2022, I asked if the catalog by the band Guadal Canal Diary was available for LP license. Yes it was. I was asked the planned wholesale price. With that, he told me they would be $4 per unit. Okay, that was better than Danielle. I was looking at doing their 2 most popular albums. The first one originally released in 1984, titled Walking in the Shadow of the Big Man, and their third album from 1987, titled 2x4. I was introduced to Guadal Canal Diary in 1989 when a friend of mine purchased their brand new CD titled Flip Flop after seeing the quirky music video of the single Always Saturday on MTV's 120 Minutes.
Where it's always Saturday, a chorus of laughter.
I liked the song as well, but it wasn't until MTV2's A to Z Video Marathon aired their 1987 video Litany, Life Goes On, that I started getting into the catalog. The band come from Marietta, Georgia, and were often name-checked with REM because of shared producer Don Dixon and being part of the jangle pop alternative scene. My thinking on these reissues was since the band's following was more based in the USA compared to many of my UK-centric artists, it would likely sell better since buyers were not likely to pay the ever-increasing overseas shipping costs. And for a brief moment of insanity, I almost told Warner, just give me all 4 of the band's original albums, but managed to rein in my enthusiasm. About 6 weeks later, he comes back to me and tells me the price will be the standard $5 each. Wait, what happened to $4? I asked and he said he'll take a look. A year later, I still had no reply, so I checked back in. The albums were cleared, and since my planned retail price was now up to $27.99, he said the amount due was now at $5,400 for each. Wow! So in a year, we went from $8,000 total to $10,800? That's some bullshit right there. But the mindset with the majors is, if you don't like it, then don't license it. I begrudgingly moved forward, hoping my optimism would be rewarded in sales. I paid my fees and got to work with the manufacturer. When I got the test pressings, I had to reject one of them because there was an extremely large pop in the middle of the first song, so strong that it caused the stylus to jump the groove on one of my turntables. The joys of vinyl. This was investigated and found to be in the mother. That wasn't good. They said they were able to improve it, so they created a new stamper and sent me another batch of tests. I was relieved to find that it had been saved from having to be recut. The one cost saving on these very expensive projects were that neither of the original LPs had custom inner sleeves, so I didn't have to worry about inserts. An added bonus is the 2x4 album was cleared to include a previous CD-only bonus track, so it would be making its vinyl debut. The shipment arrived in October, and I wasn't entirely satisfied with it. Their pressings are much thicker than other manufacturers I used, but that's not the problem. My issue was the center holes on these and some of the represses I would get. The holes seemed slightly wider than normal, and the LP wouldn't fit snugly on the spindle, meaning that there was always some play and it wouldn't often sit perfectly centered unless tapped into place. We'll call it interactive. When I asked about this, they explained that their presses leave some extra vinyl in the center hole, so they manually carve out each LP before packaging. We went back and forth with videos of what I was seeing and what they saw on their side that they felt was acceptable. There was definitely some defensiveness, and I felt their workaround was flawed. I didn't like this at all and told them not to do it on my next LP pressing. For the 1984 LP, I went with a mint green that looked really nice, and another mix I called Afternoon Sunshine to tie in with the album cover. This was a yellow and orange mix. For the 1987 LP, I chose a translucent yellow with pink swirl and a blue and white mix I called Evening Sky, also to tie in with the album cover. Both LPs were released on November 3rd, 2023.
Fantastic pygmies know where to go. Everybody's heading for the Watusi Rodeo. Trail of tears is winding on. Many pass along. Where does this road lead? No one knows. Close tomorrow's eyes upon awakening.
Optimism is overrated. The response to these LPs was not much different than the earlier Danielle Dax LP. Sales were very light. When they went into distribution, they had an initial sales burst, but it dropped quickly. So now, we have 3 of my most expensive LPs being sales duds. Not good. I expect these 2 will be sitting in my basement long after I'm gone, which is a shame. I was really surprised, with a more American audience and more accessible sound. I really thought these would do better. I'm still proud of them, but the light sales of some of my LP reissues encouraged me to send a number of vinyl request cancellations to UMG in 2023. It's too damn risky. When I shared with a label in the UK the cost of these Warner LP licenses, they were speechless. Changing the pricing to be based on retail price rather than wholesale price was extortionate. Bye, Warner. In March 2023, I was contacted by Marina Malfriedel from the band Viva Beat. She said someone had asked about their 1980 album Party in the War Zone being on CD and mentioned my label. I was already a fan of Viva Beat, having read about them in Trouser Press back in the 90s. The review wasn't particularly flattering, and my motivation for trying the LP was the review describing them as Sparks at half speed. I love Sparks, so that's all I needed to hear. When I bought the LP, right away the single from the album, Man from China, caught my ear and sounded very familiar. I was sure I had heard it at some point, but couldn't say where or when. I don't know if Marina recalled it the time she contacted me, but we had been in contact about 20 years earlier. In 2001, a compilation of Viva Beat and a later band called C. Jane Run was released on CD titled The Good Life. I bought it at the time and fell in love with a quirky song called Tense, but couldn't make out the lyrics. I contacted the band and asked if they had the lyrics, which they provided. I ended up sending them a rather beat-up copy of the music video for Man from China, which they didn't have at the time.
Dark countries, dark and blues, man from China.
After this reconnection, I started going back and forth with Marina and her husband Mick, also from the band, on release ideas. Since I was a fan, I was excited about it. They were originally looking to do a first ever CD release of the full album, but I also suggested a colored vinyl best of LP. They had a lot of unreleased songs still in their archive they wanted to get out. Even though the band existed from around 1979 to 1986, their only album was released in 1980. The band were helped along by Peter Gabriel, and it's said that the whistling in Man from China encouraged Gabriel to do something similar in his Games Without Frontiers. They went through their collection of master tapes and sent them out for transfer. I had a couple of phone calls with the person doing the master transfers as they were happening. When I got the downloads and eagerly listened to the unfamiliar songs, I was into each and every one of them. How this band never excelled to the ranks of others doing similar things at the time is beyond me. Over the summer, we went back and forth about tracks to include and running orders. Marina was never a fan of the orange used on the original LP cover, so I was fine with any changes she wanted to make. The CD was doubled in size and included 20 tracks, along with lyrics to all songs in the 8-page booklet. Marina also gave me a rough design she wanted for the compilation LP, and I tidied it up. The plan was to do the CD at 500 copies, the LP at 300 copies. Further incentive for the LP were several songs not included on the CD. There was such a wealth of material, it all couldn't fit on CD. The remastering was challenging. The tape sources generally sounded good, but all had dips and fluctuations that required a lot of repair time. Some of the unreleased tracks came from 4-track tapes. The LP master came from an original mixdown master. The only song to come from vinyl was the Man from China B-side called On Patrol. For this CD, I was trying something different. I was burned out on receiving CD stock only to find loads of damaged cases or distribution returns due to damaged cases. I didn't like digipacks, but didn't mind the fold-over cardboard wallets. It really depended on the style. Some were kinda clumsy. Some were very sleek and well-constructed. My main CD manufacturer were fine for 1,000 unit pressings, but I found on the few 500 unit pressings I had done, the cost wasn't really that different. I wanted something more cost-effective. I went with an overseas manufacturer called Monotype. They had a wallet design that I liked, and I went with it. For the LP, I continued with New Orleans Record Press with the expectation this pressing will have less problem with the center hole. I had been posting about my progress with these projects over the months on a forum I frequented. A lot of people were not familiar with the band, but liked the sound samples I had shared. When I got the CD, I had mixed feelings about the packaging. It looked nice, but the CD was extremely tight in the wallet. It took effort to get it out. I found that when you pull the CD in and out a few times, it starts to loosen up a little bit. Had it been a millimeter wider, I think it would have been perfect. When I got the LP, I opened a couple of copies and the center holes were great. But then as I opened more copies, I found others had the manual widening. This did not go over well and began a very rapid decline in relations between myself and this manufacturer. That would come to a head at the beginning of 2024. The Viva Beat CD and LP were released on December 8, 2023, earlier than expected.
Brings the snow, brings the snow. William's hands are empty when he sends me with his plans. Make your statement to the moving lights and the matching stripes. Tension, the house is burning, but there's no one home. Call me James, Henry James, Henry James, Henry James, Henry James.
The response was strong, at least for the CD. The CD sold a large amount, probably more than half of the pressing right away. The vinyl moved here and there, but even at only 300 copies, it was obvious it was going to be around for a while. The feedback on the CD was really good. Some did mention the challenge of getting it out of the packaging, but it didn't seem to be a showstopper, at least for most. When I first posted that I was looking to move away from jewel cases, there were a few people who said they would stop buying. I found that ridiculous because it's the mastering and the music that matters most, and if their decision was going to be based on my effort to stop all of the losses from the extremely fragile jewel cases, see you later. The CD moved the remaining stock over the year. The LP has moved about 200 of the 300 copies. Mick and Marina were thrilled with the releases, and they were a dream to work with. They were open to suggestions on track inclusions, and I was open to their ideas for artwork designs and running orders. It was a very collaborative effort with a very nice outcome.